It's 2010 and there is a brutal murderer on the loose and the police are scrambling for clues. We are back once more to quench your thirst for the dark criminal escapades that you may have missed because they unfolded in that country that we all know and love called La France. France. This week we are heading to a cute little hotel in a small village near Paris. But this cute little hotel has a guest with a dark secret. It's crime time. The 14th of October, 2010. Nathalie Villermet closes her bar restaurant and leaves for home. But this is going to be a night like no other. Nathalie is the owner of a small, bustling business. A small French hotel in the little village near Paris called Mesnil-le-Roi. The word Mesnil comes from the Latin meaning little estate, so this could be translated to the king's little estate. The population is roughly 6,000, and Nathalie's little hotel was the place to be. It was called Les Clos des Roses, and it was the heart of the village. You could chill in the bar, eat in the restaurant, play pub games like darts, and you could even buy your cigarettes there. And we know just how important it is for the French to know exactly where they can buy their cigarettes at any given moment. Everyone in the village knows Nathalie and they know her bubbly and charismatic character. Her hotel is her life passion. At roughly 8 p.m. in the evening, Nathalie calls her boyfriend Marc d'Estrebec to let him know that she is just finishing up and she will be home shortly. But as the hours draw late, Nathalie is nowhere to be seen. Mark finds this allegedly quite strange, but believes that maybe something came up at the hotel and he goes to bed. When he wakes up, he looks over the bed and to his surprise, Nathalie is not there. A cold feeling runs through his body. This is very unusual. He briskly gets up to check the living room, the garden, the bathroom, and she is nowhere. He immediately calls her cell phone, but there is no answer. In a panic, he calls the police and he lets them know that Nathalie has been missing since the previous evening. The police, the second they get this information from Mark, immediately open a missing persons investigation. Just hours later, the police come to Mark's store, but they come with some terrible news. They tell Mark that a body has been found and they believe it is the body of Nathalie Villermet. A group of mushroom pickers had been out picking mushrooms in the morning of the 15th of October. They were meticulously searching the forest floor for mushrooms when one of them spotted a pair of ladies' boots hidden away under a layer of twigs and leaves on the forest floor in the late morning near 11 o'clock. Mark is in shock and devastated, but he is hugely underprepared for what they are about to tell him next. Nathalie had been brutally murdered. The body. When the police got to the location of the body, they found her with her hands bound behind her back with her own belt. Her head had taken several brutal blows, and during the autopsy, they discovered that the murderer had also attempted to strangle her. What is clear is that the murder had not taken place in the forest, but the body had been transported there in what seems like an attempt to hide it. The investigation. The police quickly realized that Nathalie's car is also missing, along with all of the money she had taken with her after closing the hotel for the evening. Also missing from the location of the body is her phone and her handbag. Is the motive for this murder robbery? Everyone in the town knew who Nathalie was, and everyone in the hotel that evening would have known that she was traveling home with a rather handsome sum of money. So, is this murder the result of a robbery gone wrong? The police begin with the hotel guests. These are the people who would have most likely seen her leaving the hotel with the money. But these guests are not your average hotel guests. Nathalie's hotel was filled with people who were either just out of prison or down on their luck. Some of them were quite tough guys, and some of them practically lived there. The hotel. The evening of Nathalie's disappearance, there were 10 guests staying in the hotel. In room number 5 was Veronique. Veronique was a friend of Nathalie's, and she was one of the last people to have seen her alive. She stated that she saw Nathalie leaving the hotel that evening on Thursday, the 14th of October. She remembers seeing her leaving the hotel at around 8 p.m. and she was leaving at the same time as one of the other hotel guests, named Patrice. They both left in Nathalie's car. Who is Patrice? In room number 6 is Patrice Chevalier. Patrice is a 45-year-old French man who is down on his luck. He has no job and he has had a bit of a struggle over the last few years. Following a divorce, he had a severe car accident with a bad head injury which left him in a coma for 6 months. He then lost his driver's license and subsequently lost his job. He's currently staying at the hotel and has been for the last couple of years, and he does odd jobs around the place for Nathalie. The police begin questioning Patrice. Why were you leaving with Nathalie? Elle m'a raccompagné à Poissy. Patrice, he has this kind of tough guy accent from Paris. Poissy is a village not so far away in which his mistress lived. Patrice says that Nathalie dropped him off with his mistress Elise and then drove off. That was the last time he saw her. The police are sure to follow up on his alibi and so contact Elise and it checks out. Elise states that Patrice had arrived at her house at roughly 9 p.m. the night that Nathalie was murdered and then left again the following morning at 5:30 a.m. This was a dead end. When the police ask Patrice about his relationship with Nathalie, Patrice is very fond of Nathalie. Patrice states that Nathalie had been very kind to him over the years, practically letting him stay in the hotel for free, and in repayment he would do the odd job for her around the place. She was very kind to him and helped him get back on his feet. He had no motive to murder her. The police take witness statements from everyone, and everyone seems to agree that Patrice is a charismatic, fun guy. He owed a lot to Nathalie. She had done so much for him, and he was very grateful to her. Patrice indicates that he believes the real suspect they should be looking at is room number 9. In room number 9 is Fabrice. Fabrice had been staying in the hotel now for 8 years and was known for loving his drink, but allegedly was very violent when he was drinking. According to Patrice, Fabrice had recently got in a fight with Nathalie and had slapped her. This had happened just days before Nathalie's disappearance, and what's more is that Fabrice was known to be somewhat of a thief. Everyone knew that he had once stolen money from the hotel and Nathalie didn't let it slide. She forced him to pay it all back. When the police go to see Fabrice, they are not greeted with a smile, quite the opposite. He is, first of all, aggressively adamant that he has never stolen money from the hotel, and what's more is he doesn't even know why they would think that. His alibi for the night of Nathalie's murder is not the best. He claims he was in his room all night. However, there are no witnesses. He does offer his phone to the detectives, and with technology they are able to discover that his phone, at least, did not leave his room on the night of Nathalie's murder. But whether we can say that this definitely means that he did not leave his room is debatable. Would you murder someone without your phone? Let me know in the comments. I'm just kidding, don't murder anyone, ever. During the time that the detectives are interrogating the entirety of the hotel guests, there is still a team of specialists sweeping the forest floor for more clues. And it's not long before they find a huge branch covered in blood with a smoked cigarette right next to it. Bingo! That will definitely have DNA evidence all over it. And if the blood proves to be Nathalie's, then they have just found their murder weapon. The evidence gets sent for analysis. This is a huge break in the case because it is indeed Nathalie's blood. They've got their weapon, and furthermore, there is a second person's DNA on the branch. So if they get a match for that DNA, then they have their killer. The time is really pressing to find this killer who is wandering free. And so they decide to urgently take DNA samples of every guest at the hotel. The results come back and they have got their killer. It is, place your bets, Patrice. But Patrice has a solid alibi. He spent the night with his mistress. They, in any case, take Patrice Chevalier into custody so they can find out exactly what has happened. The interrogation. He can explain why his DNA is on the wood, and yes, it all makes perfect sense. As him and Nathalie were driving to Poissy the evening of her murder, the car suddenly stops because there is something stuck in the wheel. So they get out of the car and Patrice finds a big stick to remove a smaller stick from the wheel. Yes, that explains his DNA, but not Nathalie's blood. But don't worry, because he has an explanation for that too. Nathalie had told him that that would be perfect wood for the fire, and so he chucks the piece of wood into the car to be used as firewood in the hotel. Okay, we can maybe get on board with that, maybe, but it does feel like a long shot. So once Nathalie dropped Patrice off, the killer must have then found the stick in the car and used it as his weapon. But the next piece of evidence covered in Patrice's DNA is the belt binding Nathalie's hands behind her back. Don't worry though, because Patrice has again a perfect explanation as to why his DNA is all over her belt. He states that he is somewhat of a ladies' man and all the ladies fall for him. And Nathalie is like the rest of him, she wants a piece. So they begin a secret affair. The day of Nathalie's disappearance, Patrice had been helping her paint one of the rooms in the hotel, and she was up a ladder when she suddenly started to feel faint. She fell from the ladder, and luckily Patrice was there to catch her, which would explain why his DNA is all over her belt. And so she was so taken by his heroism that they briefly began to fool around. Furthermore, he states that the relationship between her and Mark, which everyone seems to believe is perfect, was actually on the rocks. And he suggests that the police should take a closer look at her boyfriend, Mark. And so, as it would seem from tapping his phone, the police discover that Mark has had a mistress for the last 19 years who lives in Versailles called Claudine. The police go to directly question Mark about Claudine, and he denies it, claiming that Claudine is a friend, albeit a very close friend. And what's more, Nathalie knew that they were close friends, but definitely not lovers. Mark states that him and Nathalie were extremely happy together, so much so that they had recently decided to get married after being together for so many years. Everything in their relationship was indeed going great. Mark's statement is vehemently confirmed by his inner circle. They were very much in love. Closing in. Until this point, Patrice had been adamant that he and Nathalie were on excellent terms. She had helped him get back on his feet during the darkest of times. Under further inspection, however, it is revealed that there is blood on the clothing of Patrice. And it is Nathalie's blood. But once again, Patrice has an excellent explanation for why Nathalie's blood is on his clothing. Nathalie had had a nosebleed, and that is why Nathalie's blood was on his clothing. The police are less and less convinced by Patrice's stories. One of Nathalie's best friends, named Nora, states that Patrice was desperate around Nathalie. Patrice seemed almost obsessed with Nathalie. He would flirt with Nathalie to the point she had become quite uncomfortable. Nora had suggested that she kicks Patrice out of the hotel as it had become intolerable. The idea of Patrice being removed from the hotel is indeed confirmed by other hotel staff members, and on top of that, it is confirmed by Nathalie's 2 adult sons. The police seize Patrice's belongings and they discover something absolutely shocking. They uncover from Patrice's phone over 50 photos of Nathalie. But the shocking part is that Nathalie was completely unaware that these photos had been taken. And they were photos of intimate parts of her body, such as her upper thigh, her breasts, and even her panties. Photos that he had taken discreetly underneath the table. More than 50 photos. This guy is a total creep. They really need to get some more information on his character. And so they decide to go to his ex-wife, Sandrine. Sandrine reveals that when the couple were first together, he would record a TV show that was about married couples. And then he would play it back in slow motion, freeze framing whenever there was a camera glimpse of a woman's underwear. Sandrine also recalls that he would keep track of the exact days that they would make love to make sure that they were doing it at least once a day minimum. 3 weeks after the murder, there is a new bombshell break in this case. Sandrine suddenly remembers that Patrice had recently called her for the first time in 5 years. When she first answered, he said nothing. But then she heard blood-curdling screams over and over. And at first she thought that maybe Patrice was at a theme park or something. And only now did she realize that she had been listening into the last moments of Nathalie's life. Patrice had accidentally called his ex-wife during his sadistic crime. Everything is now pointing towards Patrice being the murderer. There is just one thing that doesn't add up, and it's his alibi. He was with his lover on the night that Nathalie died, and this will be very damaging to their case in the trial. He could walk free. So they really need to figure out what exactly happened on the night of Nathalie's murder. They go back to Elise, the mistress of Patrice, and they ask her again what exactly happened on that evening. And she admits she had lied to them. He had asked her to lie to them. And what's more is he had asked her to lie to them before Nathalie was murdered. And we all know exactly what that means. Premeditated murder. He had planned to murder Nathalie. But, of course, Patrice, being Patrice, he has an explanation for everything. So apparently the real reason he had asked his mistress to lie for him on the evening that Nathalie was murdered was because he was actually planning on committing a different crime with different people, and so he hadn't told the police because he didn't want to get in trouble. And this crime is not backed up by any evidence because he doesn't want to tell the police who the people were that he was allegedly trying to commit this crime with. He really doesn't want to give them any information, and so we don't have much to go on, just Patrice's word. The police are done with his stories. And so they are now convinced that Patrice is the murderer. But what is his motive? The detectives believe that what actually happened on the night of the 14th of October is that Patrice gets into Nathalie's car under the pretense that he needs a lift to his mistress's house. And during their journey, he attempts to strangle Nathalie with her scarf, accidentally ringing his ex-wife. There is a struggle and he pulls her out of the car, reaching for the weapon that he had prior to the event had sharpened, and then begins beating her violently on her head. They eventually find Nathalie's car quite far away from the forest, and the car contains a whole bunch more evidence. When they analyze the blood spatter, they find that somewhere between Nathalie being strangled and bludgeoned, she had also been hit by her own car. And then her hands were bound together just in case she wasn't dead yet. Then he drove her body to the middle of the forest and dumped it, trying to hide it with some leaves and twigs. He also attempted to dispose of the murder weapon, but in the dark of the night, he accidentally threw the murder weapon practically onto a public pathway. All this evidence really does make one thing strikingly obvious, and that is that Nathalie fought hard for her life. She was one tough woman. When Patrice is awaiting his trial, he writes a letter to Mark, the boyfriend of Nathalie, and he states in the letter that he is so sorry to Mark for what happened to Nathalie, and he can't imagine why someone would commit such an awful, heinous crime. He completely denies any involvement in the act. The trial. The most obvious thing about Patrice during the trial is his arrogance. In the court, his behavior is outrageous. He, among other things, brags about how much money he makes. And remember, he is essentially living rent-free in a hotel of the woman he has just murdered. When the court is shown the evidence of the pictures from his phone that he has secretly taken of Nathalie, instead of being ashamed or embarrassed, he, for some reason, crazily thinks that it's normal to suggest that the court should feel some sort of pleasure, some sort of sick pleasure from looking at these pictures. It's crazy. He also comments that he could never have committed the murder, and the reason being is because there was just so much evidence pointing towards him, and he is not stupid enough to leave so much evidence, so clearly it was not him. He is sentenced to 20 years in jail, and on top of that, due to his arrogance in the court, the judge explicitly states that the evidence points to him and him only as the irrefutable murder of Nathalie Villermet. Mark, the boyfriend of Nathalie, continued to run the hotel in her place, the Hotel Les Clos des Roses, and to this day the hotel is still there. So you can go and visit the hotel that the wonderful, beautiful Nathalie once owned. Alright guys, that's all for this week. I hope you have had your fill of French true crime. If you are thirsty for more, feel free to tune into this video over here, or subscribe, or ring the notification bell, or like. Au revoir et à la prochaine.